Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Parenting is Easy, Said No One Ever. I remember becoming a parent, and obviously how it's something that changed my life for the better a million times over. And there have been so many ups and downs regarding your own insecurities and feeling like, am I doing the right thing? And that imposter syndrome, I think, kicks in more becoming a parent than maybe any other area away in life. And I think there's so many different things to talk about when it comes to being a parent, whether it's a first time parent or the whole birthing process could be something that I think there's more to be explored. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. I have on Suzzie Vehrs, who is a doula and childbirth educator who is very passionate about helping moms create the birth that they love. She has worked with over 200 moms in giving birth. She has also set up over 200 home births, and we're going to talk a little bit about that of the differences between a home birth and a hospital birth, what to expect, or I guess to say as the book goes, which maybe one day we'll have on the author of what to expect when expecting, but from a mom's point of view and her own experience in giving birth and how that comes into play in today's day and age. And I think this is a really enjoyable episode for anyone that is either contemplating becoming a mom or building a family or someone that has already done this before. I think there's some little tidbits of information that we can pick up from this really awesome episode. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Suzzie, I know there's a lot for us to get to regarding this specific topic, but I'm curious, I really want to start, I guess, at the beginning, as parents are thinking about becoming parents. Are there certain things specifically that you would say you would want upcoming new parents to sort of think about beforehand as they're getting ready to the concept of becoming parents in the beginning?
Yeah, so often we think about like newborns, oh my God, they're so cute and they're so snuggly and they're adorable, which they are, but it's also really hard. And a lot of my clients tell me, like, why didn't you tell me it's so hard? And I think it's because it's really difficult to talk about. We want to imagine that this is going to be a very romanticized era of life when, in fact, all of a sudden after you have a newborn, you go from a life where you probably had most things figured out to, if you consider like the hierarchy of needs in life, that all of a sudden you're thrown back into the very basics where eating, sleeping, just the very basic things that are the foundation of health and wellness and success and happiness in life are all of a sudden very challenging to figure out. And so I would just say if you're a new parent, you're considering having a baby, start thinking about like, yes, it's fun to think about what their whole life will be, but as you're getting closer to actually having your baby, start talking together with your partner about, well, how are you going to watch out for each other and make sure that your basic needs are met in this new atmosphere where you have so many more demands than you've ever had before.
Oh, for sure. And I think there's so much to be said regarding parenting. Obviously, one of the main things of parenting is taking care of someone else. And forget
Absolutely.
a lot is taking care of ourselves. And I think when you have someone that's keeping that in check and keeping that balance, it really goes so far regarding what the process is going to be like, and also what you're going to be like with that child. For the person that is giving birth over here. Now, I know one of the things that I'm familiar with that you do, but if you give us a little bit more explanation, there are different options when it comes to giving birth. I'm curious if you could talk about them and you could say what are the pros and cons of the different ways and different places to be giving birth, whether it's at home, in the hospital, order birth, and stuff like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. There are so many options when you give birth. Most people are hoping for a vaginal birth, but you can choose a C-section if you want. So there's always a surgical route. Sometimes surgical route becomes less of an option and more of a need. But also location is really, really important. I had my first in a hospital and my second at home, and I loved my home birth experience. Another thing to think about with that is if you are a mom that is looking to avoid a C-section, one of the best things you can do is to actually look up at the C-section reads at your different birthing options. For example, where I'm located in Seattle, we're very fortunate. I have 7 different hospitals
No.
that I go to as a doula. And though if it were me, having a baby today would be reasonable for me to get to in labor. I know we're a little bit, a lot of people don't have that luxury, but we do. of those hospitals, their C-section rates go from about 20% to close to 40% at some hospitals and this is for first-time low-risk moms. So for people that you would expect would have the easiest type births. And a lot of those differences are really just the systems and structures within those hospital systems that allow for different types of care. Now, some people are really surprised to find out that the WHO has said for years, decades and decades, that a C-section rate between
That would be
5 and 10%.
the World Health Organization, for those that don't know the WHO is.
Oh yeah, thank you for correcting me. My partner always says, people think that's the band when you say that.
Correct. That's why I said it. Yeah.
Yes. They have said for years that a C-section rate between 5 and 10% is the sweet spot where we should be. So you're probably noticing like, oh, none of our hospitals are reaching that. And the WHO, as I guess I'm supposed to say it, they say anything over 15% is actually doing more harm than good. So when we're going above those numbers, we're actually, from our type of care, actually creating situations in which C-sections become necessary. Now, the most surprising thing about this is our out-of-hospital midwives, our birth centers and home birth midwives, are the only group here that meet that 5 to 10% C-section rate for the first-time low-risk moms. So sometimes if it's a legal option in your area, if your midwives, for example, the midwives here can carry all the medications that they have at the hospital, they can resuscitate a newborn, it can be a very good option for the right people.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think the one thing that comes into mind over here when you talk about hospitals, obviously, is the insurance. And, I could see, obviously, being in the field that I'm in as a therapist, the concept of insurance really coming into play regarding the type of care that you're going to get. And I'm sure that comes into play regarding that 20 to 40% that you talk about in hospitals. But you mentioned regarding home births. And obviously, it's a very different experience when it comes to how a first-time mother is going to be giving birth as opposed to giving birth in a hospital. Where there is also different level of care. And I can see it being night and day differences. And I'm curious if you could talk about the differences of what a mother can expect or what the family might be expecting when it comes to being able to either making that decision of giving birth at home versus giving birth in a hospital.
Yeah, absolutely. The care is very different. Typically, if you're in the hospital, you are most likely working with either a midwifery group or an obstetrical group. So you don't actually know who is going to be your doctor on the day that you give birth. It's really whoever is on call. You may or may not have met them. You will have a nurse that you may or may not have met. And your care is going to change depending on the hospital, either every 12 hours or 24 hours, depending on what type of shift your doctor and nurses are working. Typically, nurses are on 12 hours and doctors and midwives are either on 12-hour or 24-hour shifts, and they are caring for multiple patients at a time. So typically in the hospital, your nurse will be with you the most. Your doctor will check in on you every 3 or 4 hours for about 10 to 15 minutes. They'll prescribe whatever they need, but they're mostly in and out. Versus at a home birth, you have many care providers to one mother. So when I had my daughter Hazel at home, I had my midwife who had been to over 500 births and she was fantastic in every way. And I had seen her specifically all throughout my pregnancy. And she came to my home for our after baby checks instead of me having to get in the car and go back to her. I also had her assistant and her student and my doula. So even though we lived in a smaller apartment at the time, I was pretty busy. It was me, my ex-husband, the father of my children, and we had just unlimited care. And so they were listening to the baby's heart rate and doing all the things they would do at the hospital. But it was also very fun and intimate. And, they had to be there. They had no other patients. So we had their, full attention when I needed it. And when I needed space, they were able to grant it most of the time if it was between intervals of checking on the baby.
Got it. Yeah, and just to add a little bit more to the hospital stay as well. I think it's experience that I've heard from a lot of people, and I guess from personal experience regarding my kids and my wife, is that you can have a doctor that could be a part of a practice that also is associated with a hospital. So when you come to the
Mhm.
hospital, you could be comfortable with the person that you're with just because of a it's someone that you've been seeing for the past 9 months or whatever it is, or it's someone that it's your doctor that you've been seeing for a while. So I think that comes into play as well, just having a certain comfortability, which I guess you could have at home too, but just it's a completely different experience. And I'm curious, is that something a home birth? Is that something that people can get covered through insurance, or are there ways for people to to have it compensated for?
Yeah, yeah, it depends on which state you live in.
Okay,
It's very different throughout the country. Here in Washington, midwifery is not only legalized but recognized by the state. So if you have insurance that covers birth, which all insurance has to cover labor and delivery, it will also cover a home birth. Um, Same with like if you're on Apple or Washington, that's our state insurance will cover a home birth as well. It's not like that in every state.
right.
For example, in California, midwifery is legalized, but not part of the insurance programs. And then there are some states where out of hospital midwifery is illegal, in which case it would not be an option for you. Um, I know like I loved my home birth experience, but I do want to say that it is like a very personal choice. And even I've had many, many, many parents walk into these hospitals where the C-section rate is very high and still have exceptional, great experiences, especially if they know what they want and they know how to communicate what they want. And they're comfortable. If the hospital makes you feel safe, you should absolutely be in the hospital. They have, or if you're high risk, or if you have like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes or something going on where some of those larger interventions or surgeries might be like the reasonable and best choices for you.
For sure. I think the key word that you said there, and I want you to expand that a little bit, is when you say communicating properly with the hospital or or with the Dunas or whoever else that you're with. What are some key, whether it's questions or phrases that new moms can start questioning or asking about when it comes to what to expect from whatever they choose?
Yeah. I do suggest that moms put together a birth plan, which is essentially a one pager that talks about who you are and what's important to you. Because when you're at the hospital, a lot of times you're working with people you've never met before or people that have, I'll just, that are overwhelmed because they have a lot going on and they haven't necessarily themselves had enough care. I know when I work for 24 hours, when I'm on that last 4 hours, my brain is like on the struggle bus. And I see that with our providers as well. And that's not their fault. That's that their job stretches them to the limits of what humans can do.
Right.
Um, but to give you an example, I was with one mom who was delivering her baby and she was taking a little bit longer to push. And her doctor was there, like ready to catch the baby. And in that hour where the doctor just kind of sat there patiently and waited, the doctor also admitted somebody who had come in through the emergency room who they were going to send home. And so she's on her phone saying, "No, I am going to see that patient. Let them into the hospital." She prescribed medication for another mom in another room that had a specific allergy that she remembered. And so when we're going into these situations, we need to remember that these providers are trying, but they have multiple moms who want different things. So if there's one mom at Christmas, I worked with a mom who said to me, "The only thing I want is my baby by Christmas. How do I get an induction? How soon is that?" And the next mom I worked with was, I'm natural in everything. How do I make sure I have no interventions in my birth? Right? So if you can't describe who you are, which one of these moms you are, what makes you unique, what makes you special, what makes you feel comfortable, the interventions you want, things that you're nervous about, then nobody can help you with both getting what you want and two, helping with the emotional side of making choices in labor, which sometimes have to change just based on the fact that our needs evolve and change or our understanding of what we want
But
evolves and changes in the process.
For sure. I think it's like everything in life, whether you're planning a vacation or date night or something, things are constantly going to change. And I think the way we could prevent that anxiety as much as possible is to cope ahead and to prepare as much as possible. And obviously, when it comes
Mhm.
to something that's as life changing, which is obviously can't compare it to a vacation, but still, it's something that's obviously a lot more life changing than a vacation. The more we could prepare, the better off we are. Uh, I I think obviously that education, like you're talking about, I think is a very important piece over here. But when you also talk about, I guess you could say, nutrition, which is obviously a very very big part of what a mom is going through in the beginning stages of being pregnant and up through the last couple of weeks until she's giving birth. Are there certain things that you recommend a mom should be making sure that she has, whether it's from whether it's vitamins or it's specific types of food that they should be eating in general?
Yeah, yeah. Nutrition is extraordinarily important in labor. In pregnancy, there are studies that show that what a mom eats will affect every outcome of the birth process and the child for up to 2 years. Um, that's when the study ended, so theoretically that could go on, but um, a couple things that are really important, if I can boil pregnancy nutrition down to like just a couple points, are one, making sure that you get whole food protein. I know protein shakes, we live in a world where it's like sometimes we try to simplify our foods down. Whole food protein is so robust that you get a lot of both the big nutrients that you need, but also those little like the micronutrients too that typically work better when you have them together. For example, eating a whole egg is better than eating just the egg whites because that yolk has um, fats that help your baby's brain develop. So if you're trying to think about, well, how much protein, at a minimum, think like 60 to 80 grams in the first half of pregnancy and 80 to 100 until the end. And then the second key, if you're trying to think about ideal pregnancy nutrition, is trying to get at least 5 servings of either fruits or vegetables a day. 7 or 9 is even better. Sometimes when we talk about protein, all of a sudden, if we take it to an extreme, carbs become the enemy and fruits and vegetables get kind of left off. Um, Fruits and vegetables are so important for making sure babies grow well. So if you think about babies that have like intrauterine growth, or that are just very small, that just stop developing kind of towards the end of pregnancy, nutrition is one of those things that can actually prevent that. In many cases, in many, many cases. Just to give a number, there's one study that looked at preterm birth weights and nutritional counseling, and they were able to lower preterm birth rates from 12% to 2% just through interventions with diets. Currently, it's about 10%. So we're not saying that any mom should take blame if they go through something so traumatic as that. We would want to give support and love and encouragement. But I also want moms to know that this tool, what you put in your mouth, is one of the best tools for creating a healthy pregnancy
That makes a lot of
and
sense.
sidestepping obstacles. Yeah.
Sure. Prenatal vitamins. What should parents be looking out for, and where should they be buying something that is apropos for them?
Yeah. I always say the best thing to do is talk to your doctor. We're all very different in what we need in a prenatal vitamin, and they're all very different themselves. For example, a lot of prenatal vitamins don't have iron, yet 17% of moms have anemia in pregnancy, and 45% of moms can have iron deficiencies enough that they're not anemic yet, but they are showing signs of deficiency, the fatigue, the brain fog, things like that. Um, on the other hand, too much iron, which is why they don't put it in every prenatal vitamin, can affect your insulin resistance. So go talk to your doctor, ask them to do blood tests for things like anemia, and then based on what you need, go get a prenatal vitamin. I think we need to move away from blanket statements and into individualized care based on our own physiology.
Yeah, for sure. And I think we're holding it a place, at least here in America, that, thank God we're able to have that care for each individual based on whatever their needs are. I mean, the fact that we're talking about so many different types of births, and you could go to a pharmacy or CVS and see so many different types of prenatal vitamins, I think shows the advance of where we are. And not every vitamin is for every person, and it really has to be what is right for you. And I think one of the things that I've heard you talk about is the concept of prevention in the form of movement and nutrition. I'm curious if you could talk a
Definitely.
little bit more about that regarding being able to have that prevention, but in a way where it's not necessarily having to refrain from things, but in a way where it's able to advance who we are and what we're trying to do for the better of ourselves, our hopefully new child really soon, and the family itself, the family dynamics.
Yeah, yeah, movement, very, very important. Um, One thing people don't realize is if you're near the end of pregnancy, a 30-minute walk 4 times a week can reduce your risk of a C-section. I mean, it's just our bodies need a certain level of movement. If you can get into classes like where you have an instructor that leads you and you are with other pregnant people, that is the absolute best. Like prenatal yoga, there's prenatal dance classes, swimming is really great. But really, if you were doing it before pregnancy, you can typically do it during pregnancy unless your doctor is giving you a specific recommendation. And if you weren't doing anything before pregnancy, you can actually start doing something as long as you're listening to your body and, we're not thinking about phrases like I remember when I was a runner, everyone would say, like, no pain, no gain.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, leave that type of thinking behind. But go do something. Go do something because it will improve your birth outcomes. You'll heal faster after birth. And it is very great for protecting our mental states as well.
Sure. Have you seen a difference in the clients that you're working with, depending on their age? So are they going into the whole process, not just regarding the anxiety aspect of things, but regarding physiologically? Are things different for, let's say, a woman giving birth that might be in her lower 20s or maybe even younger than that, as opposed to someone that's in later 20s or 30s or even older?
Actually, I am probably going to go against the grain here and say not really. The body is meant to give birth, and there are some risks that as we get older, we need to think
Yeah.
about. Sometimes our nutritional stores are more depleted and we need to focus more on nutrition. Sometimes, some people do choose induction sometimes after they're past that 35 years old, but many people don't. Um, I would say that most of the moms that I work with, a lot of the moms I work with are in their 30s, that they go on to have very healthy pregnancies, they go on to have healthy births. And so if you're hearing a lot about advanced maternal age and you're worried about that, I really just hope I can give you like a little bit of confidence in knowing that your body didn't fundamentally change because you grew up another 5 or
Right.
10 years.
Yeah.
Yes, there are some things that your care team will be more watching out for, such as hemorrhaging, and there may be more reason for you to choose an induction by that 41 weeks, just to avoid risks of an extended pregnancy.
Right.
But those typically will go very well, just like they would for somebody that's younger.
Okay, perfect. I'm so happy you sort of went regarding the induction. So I'm curious, like how new moms and their partners can sort of go about this conversation with their provider regarding getting an induction. What type of questions should they be asking, and what type of questions should they be asking themselves regarding how they feel? So asking both the provider and things for themselves regarding getting that induction, and at what point should those questions be coming up?
Yeah, yeah. Inductions are a really great tool and they can be a phenomenal birth experience. If you don't know what an induction is, it's basically when you have a medical start to your birth instead of waiting for labor to start on its own. Um, it is a tricky conversation though right now because if you are somebody who's open to interventions and you're okay with medicine and you feel safe using it, then they can be a great experience. But it's very difficult to have a induction without an epidural because
Yeah.
the experience of contractions is much different and often much sharper, and you will often experience higher pain levels. And that's saying a lot considering what we all think about pain and labor, anyways. Um, So
I
if you're
can't
trying to
comment.
go that,
I haven't
yeah.
given birth, but I'm saying, I think that I don't. My wife keeps on saying, I don't know if I could have done this without an epidural, even though in one situation it was too late to get the epidural. But in general, the concept of doing it without an epidural, no man can ever say that they could understand the pain of what a woman goes through with the body. But I could see that epidural being so important for the birthing process. But obviously, there are many people
I
that
see what
don't
you
get
mean.
it for wanting a certain type of birth. What type of mindset can someone try to work on for themselves and exercise, like I say, within the whole experience without using the epidural, and where would they go to make sure that they're having the experience without it being a traumatic experience in that sense?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I will say this. How we experience pain during labor is very individual. The uterus is a very strong muscle, and it's the largest and strongest muscle in your body. And when you're experiencing a contraction, you're literally feeling this muscle flex, right? So if you think about like a bicep curl is a bicep contraction, labor contractions, uterus curls, essentially, right? Um, but you have no control over how long they are, how your labor, how strong they are. A 5 hour labor is definitely going to be much more intense than a labor that un, un, unravels over 12 or 14 hours. Um, so different people will have different levels of pain without an epidural. One thing that I teach moms about though is the fear, tension, pain cycle, where when we feel contractions, if we have fear about them or we're worried about them, we typically will tense our bodies and almost work against the contraction. And that increases the pain and the sensation
Yeah.
of the contraction. Like if you imagine you're curling, doing a bicep curl with a 15-pound weight, and now you're tensing your whole body and you're terrified, and someone's coming and putting their arm pressing down on you as you're trying to do the same amount of work, it becomes very much more difficult. So things like mindfulness, women that have like 8 weeks of mindfulness training, their pain levels go down 40%, which is pretty remarkable. Typically, epidurals will lower people when they do studies looking at like, okay, on a pain scale of 0 to 10, typically epidurals will lower people about 6 points on the pain scale. Getting in the water will lower people about 4 points on the pain scale. So that's why if you're like, why do people do water births? That's why it's pretty effective in helping cope with the pain. It can make it manageable. Um, and the last is just wanting to do it. If you want to have a natural birth, my moms go about 50-50, and I've had an epidural, not had an epidural. And you can have great experiences both ways. You just need a little bit, if you have an epidural, you need something to fill the time. If you are not having an epidural, you need a very strong mindset.
Right, and a really good coach sounds like as well, because I think I could go really, really far. And I think the breathing and the mindfulness is obviously something we talk about in this podcast numerous times. One thing when it comes to new moms, that's also it's really important. And hearing the numbers you talk about dropping drastically, I think that could go really far of going to birthing classes beforehand or watching some videos or something online to give some guidance about where to go within the breathing world and the meditation world and how beneficial that could be. Is there a place that you would recommend people can look for, whether it's online or maybe finding a certain class? Where can people look for something like that?
Yeah, I myself have a childbirth course where we have paths for both moms with epidurals and moms without epidurals, because I believe that moms should be kind of prepped for both. Just because sometimes, like your wife, was too late to get an epidural when she got there. That does happen. Or sometimes you get to the hospital and the anesthesiologist is in the OR and you can't get an epidural for a couple hours, which isn't the most common, but it's very frustrating. And on the flip side, sometimes if you're planning a natural birth, sometimes other things become important, like you need to do an induction for your own health and safety or your baby's health and safety. And now these tools are likely not going to be enough. Mindfulness will not get you through labor with Pitocin. It just won't. And I maybe like I've had one person out of the 200 moms I've worked with, more than 200 moms, I've worked with successfully do a natural labor plus an induction. Everyone else it's like, I'm done. So they are just different tasks, right? But also there's a lot of if you can go to a local birth class where you go in person and you meet with the same group of moms, if you're the type of person that has felt like isolated, or if you're in a new area, or if you don't have a lot of friends that have had babies, that is one of the best places you can go to create community with other people that are in the same place as you. So even if you're like, I don't want to go to a birth class for 2 hours on a Thursday night, think about it also as a networking place where you're like, okay, after I have this baby, my world is going to be different. It's going to be very hard to meet my social, emotional needs. And a lot of my friends won't necessarily relate because they won't be in the same place, right? And so go and make those friends if you can. Fall back to an online class. There's so many online classes. But I have such a passion for those like in person. I truly believe we need those in person connections more than we need our online people.
Oh, for sure. I said as a therapist, I'd much rather meet you in person than meet you online, but there is a place for it. And I think the one thing that we've learned over the past 4 years is that there could be a lot of benefit from having the online world be more intimate, and we could do it. And it is possible. So for sure that's something that, is an option. And if that's the only option for you, then you should use that. And I think that's very, very helpful to hear about that. The way you talk to parents, does it change regarding if it's their first time giving birth or if they're already a mom of one or two beforehand?
I think it does, because I feel like the first time you go through birth, it's very overwhelming, especially now where there's so much information thrown at you. Even 5 years ago, when I did my career switch into work as a doula, there was a lot of information, but not in the same, the way the algorithms on Instagram have updated. And if you look at one birth post now, that's all you see. And then you have such a wide variety of opinions there. It's really hard to filter. I think that a lot of people have more questions now, and more sense of uncertainty, and more sense of being like caught in between. Like, who do I trust, and what is the right answer, and is this someone's opinion, or is this based in research? Because, if you're reading an article, you can look at the sources, but if you're just getting inundated with information, it's hard to kind of filter what is fact and what is fiction. So I do feel like for first-time moms, when we work together, a lot of it's like, okay, let's go from the beginning and talk about all your choices from the beginning to end. And you're going to have questions. So when we get to places where you're like, why would it matter how I'm monitored? We'll stop and we'll talk about it. Whereas with second-time moms, they usually say like, oh, I did this in my first birth and I liked it, or like that happened and I don't want that to happen. What strategies or what do I ask for to avoid that? Or how do I make sure that happens again if they had a really great experience? So I feel like with first-time moms, there's a lot of education. And with second-time moms, it's more like listen, and give a tidbit here or there. Obviously, we listen to first-time moms too, but I feel like they have more questions in general. So
For sure. I think one of the things that come up as well is feeding a baby. Are we doing it naturally? Are we breastfeeding? Are we giving bottles? How to find the right formula? What type of guidance and where do you take the conversation?
yeah, I am very pro fed baby is best. A lot of families will do both breast and bottle. A lot of my families pump. And so even though you're using breast milk, the load of the labor can be shared. The thing that I try to prep my moms for is that when you're feeding a baby, you are going to be taking 40 hours a week to feed your baby. It is a full-time job. And most people don't think about it in the sense, when we go to work for 40 hours, we recognize whether we're working at a fast food restaurant or a CEO of a company that you're showing up and that's work. And sometimes I think that with breastfeeding, where it's in these little chunks of time, and that's just feeding a baby. That's not putting the baby to sleep, changing their diaper, doing all the million other little things. Like, we need to recognize moms for the work that they're doing and also help, like, how do we share that workload? And so when I'm talking with families, it's more about like, okay, let's create a routine or a rhythm here. So when it's like 3 a.m. and you're getting up, are you both getting up, or is one of you getting up? Are you getting up and just pumping and going back to bed? If both partners have maternity and paternity leave, here in Seattle, a lot of people do. A lot of times dads here will take the night shift. It's really, really popular, a really popular setup, because a lot of the dads here are gamers. And so they'll get like wraps for their babies. And if you have these Velcro babies that won't sleep for the first few months unless they're being held, they can tuck them into a little carrier and they'll stay up all night playing video games with their friends. And a lot of times their friends will stay up all night with them. And so they take the night shifts, right? It's just very common here to see that. Other dads, like I've had other dads say, like, she hasn't changed a single diaper since we came home when I do their checks. So I do really want to recognize that there has been, I think, a shift in sharing responsibilities with newborns, but that also comes with having conversations about, like, once you realize it's like that 40 hours is a long time, then it's like, okay, wait, no. This is not something easy. We do need to do something to make this manageable for everybody.
Yeah. And I think it's something that is constantly changing. I think that's probably for first-time moms, and even if you already have a kid, both for whatever the family dynamic is, there's so much change happening. Even from the start of pregnancy and what's happening physiologically and emotionally and mentally, to what's happening in home regarding scheduling, and whether there is paternal or maternal leave. I'm hearing you talk about the staying up all nights, and not something that I would recommend happening too often for the dads that are playing games. And while they could be beneficial, and there's also a way of living life that that could get in the way of functioning properly the way we're supposed to. So yes, there is a time and a place for it.
On the other hand, it's often the mother that is taking the night shift and day shift, right? And so if you have just a woman on her own taking a 24-hour shift with a baby, and she's going 2 weeks with getting 2 hours of sleep at a time,
correct,
that's also not appropriate.
100%.
And so, maybe we need to be even looking at, like, is the recommendation feed a baby every 3 hours and wake them up every 3 hours to feed reasonable?
Right.
Maybe there's a conversation around that, but right now that's what the recommendation is for the first couple weeks home. And so if you're thinking about this 2-week time frame where you have a newborn, you have to come up with a plan where both parents are going to sleep.
Beautiful.
And if the dad can sleep during a day and a mom can't, or if a mom's trying to do 24-hour shifts for 2 weeks straight, right, sustainability has to come into the picture. But we also have to recognize that there is a period of time that is not sustainable. And so, if you have friends, family, people that are helping, that's great. But a lot of people don't. And so, being creative about how you're pulling your resources is very important.
100%.
Sorry, I know I totally understand what you say about sustainability.
Yeah. But for sure, I agree with that. And I think it goes back to the point you were saying before of having that in-person group that you're meeting at even before you give birth, and how that creates a certain support system. And for people that are doing this amazing new transition in life alone, to have other people around is essential. And if you have a partner that's able to take a shift, they should take a shift, because it takes a village to raise a child. There's a reason why that saying has not gotten old over the past 1,000 years, is because it's true. And I think it's something that it's important to know how to have that shift, and I think how to go about doing it and checking in with each other. The way we sort of started this today, this conversation was pretty much, taking care of yourself and making sure that you know how to do things for yourself, as well as taking care of your child. I think something that the example we talk about in this podcast all the time, I know my wife and I tell each other all the time as well, is remember to put on your mask first before you put on the mask of your child. And there's a reason for that. And it's important to know how to go about doing things. And like you mentioned, our priorities change. So we might have our schedules for 6 months out when we're single, and we haven't even thought about being a parent yet. Now it's just like getting a bowl of cereal in without anyone crying or disturbing me is like a win-win for the day. And that could be difficult.
Yeah.
And, I think it's something that, there's a big change. So when you have a partner that's able to support you and able to be a part of this conversation, for sure, that's probably one of the most important things. And obviously, as much as moms are super moms, not just because of the birth they do, because of everything else they do, but even super moms need to have a break, and it's important for them to have a
Yeah.
break. And I think
Yeah.
that is really important.
And a lot has changed in the past few years too. I had my first daughter 9 years ago. And when I came home from the hospital, we were told to feed on demand. When she wakes up and she's hungry, feed her. And when she's not, let her sleep. And so for me, when I came home from the hospital, it was, the first day we came home, she slept for 5 hours and then I got a 5 hours stretch of sleep. And now when moms leave the hospitals, they're told, no, if your baby hasn't woken up to eat in 3 hours, it's your job to wake them up and feed them. And so I have very mixed feelings about that because there must have been a reason for the change in that recommendation, and probably because babies weren't getting enough to eat and that was causing damage, right? On the other hand, this new expectation that moms have now of the first 2 to 3 weeks being available every 3 hours to feed your baby is causing emotional and it
Yeah.
is an unsustainable request, because unless there is a way for you to get sleep at some point, it's literally impossible. And so now you're adding on top of this very physically demanding thing, like feelings of not doing enough and worries about your
Mm.
baby. And so I would say that like it is a big change that I've seen over the past few years with the changes in recommendations on how we feed our newborns. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't feel confident enough to say like go back to the way it was when I was
Right.
a new parent, because that's in direct contradiction with what all the people, the AAP and the, your doctor in your hospital are telling you, the sheets that they send you home with, the lactation consultants. And so it is very challenging. And if a lot of moms, when they say like, why didn't you tell me it was so hard? Or, if you're talking with your parents, like my parents don't understand how hard it is. It's probably because your parents were never asked to do the same things the society is asking you to do as a parent. Um, and I don't know, like I truly don't have answers for that piece.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point. But I think that's going back to what the wise thing that you were talking about before is having a support group of how important that is. And if there are frustrations, if there's
Yeah.
sleep deprivation, to acknowledge it and to be aware of it and to
Mention,
talk about it. And whether you have a partner, a family member, parent, or a peer, or maybe someone from a birthing class, that goes really, really far regarding being able to have that support around you. And just to ask in a question form based on what you were just saying, what have you seen being the biggest difference in how the birthing world has gone and the changes from when you started this over 200 clients ago to where you are today? What have you seen being the biggest differences?
the biggest one is probably the induction question. In 2018, there was a big study where they were looking at can we induce people just because we want to at 38 weeks? And so now there's a lot of practices here that will say like, oh, you're 38 weeks or 39 weeks. Sorry, it's 39 weeks, not 38 weeks, even though sometimes they suggest it at 38 weeks anyways, because that's the first week you're considered full
Full, right?
term. Um, it's a complicated question. I would recommend having a conversation, doing some research on inductions and creating your own baseline of how you feel about them. And then check with your doctor to see if you're with a practice where you're in alignment. Because some doctors will say you're 39 weeks, you have to have an induction, even if there's no medical reason, and others won't. And there's a lot of very, very mixed research about whether C-sections, increase with inductions or decrease. And it probably depends on where a specific place starts, Um, that I'd say that's the number one thing. And then also, as we were talking about, just the demands on moms, the expectations with breastfeeding have definitely changed. Um, it's just becoming more and more routine for moms to be told you feed every 3 hours no matter what.
Hmm.
And that is a level of superhero
Can't even
to do
fathom.
that for
Yeah.
several weeks, is I don't know. I don't know. I'm
Right.
sorry. I wish I was more eloquent about that, but
Well, I'm also hearing a little bit in your voice, and maybe you could talk about this. Obviously, the impact of you having kids has really come into play regarding what you do and being in the field that you're in. But I'm curious if you could talk about, let's say, the biggest impact that your own experiences have had on the work that you do and what we're talking about here today.
I think my experiences taught me. I'm also a mom of loss. So I went through a miscarriage, a very medically complex miscarriage first. And then I had my daughter Zoe, and then I had my daughter Hazel. And when I was pregnant the very first time, I knew something was wrong. I was beyond sick and I could not get, like, my doctors were like, everyone's sick. And I was like, no, but like not everyone's losing weight. And so it was really hard to get care. Even with, I switched providers a few times. I've talked with midwives, I've talked with OBs, and it wasn't until I was 14 weeks they did an ultrasound and finally listened to me. And they found like, oh, like there's no heartbeat here, even though like you're very sick. And then I had about a year of complications after that before I got pregnant with my daughter Zoe.
Mm.
My daughter Zoe, I also had a hard time finding my place in the system. And then with my daughter Hazel, I just had absolutely excellent care. And I think a lot of that was because I had become friends with a midwife. She was not my midwife. I had moved again, but she taught me what good care looked like and what to ask for and what to expect. And so now I feel like I have that high level of expectation of care no matter where I go. And I typically find it. And if I'm with a client, as a doula, I'm not a medical provider, right? But there are a lot of, we are typically helping you with your information, gathering your information with your emotional needs, your physical needs throughout the birth process. And also protecting your right of informed consent are typically the four things that doulas really, that we're supposed to do. So a lot of that is like recognizing if you're not getting the care that you need, helping you advocate for that. For example, one of my clients recently was feeling like very fatigued, and she told her OB about it, and she was like, it just feels different and worse than it's supposed to be. And they were like, oh, don't worry about it. And we talked about it, and then we talked about some things it could possibly be. I gave her some things to read, and then she went back to her doctor, and they did a blood test, and they found out she was anemic. And so I think for me, one of the big things that has changed is understanding that the biggest expert is the person that's pregnant, because you know what's going on in your own body, and you might not know a lot about pregnancy, and you might not know much about hospital systems, and you might not know all your options. And that's okay, but you do typically know what's best for you, and you do typically know what's right and wrong. And so it's amplifying your voice and then helping you get those needs met when you might not even know yet how to formulate all the things you're processing into, like, what's normal, what's not normal, how do I ask, who do I ask, things like that.
But I think the biggest thing I take away from what you're saying is what's normal is what mommy feels is normal. And if there's a parent intuition, that's what counts more than anything else. I don't care how many letters you have before or after your name. It really has to do with you, and you get a right. If you have a question, it's a valid question because you're asking the question, because you're feeling a certain way.
Right.
And I think that's very, very important, which I'm so happy to hear you say, that the concept of empowering the mom to be able to go ahead and say what it is that she's feeling and is important. And sometimes you'll get that from your OB and how they're going to be treating you and the whole situation. Sometimes it might not be in that place. And like you're saying, you've gone to multiple providers because I guess the nicest way to say it is that moms have to be selfish when it comes to this whole process. They have to do what they feel, what feels right for them. Suzzie, this has been absolutely, there's like so many more places that I want to go and ask about regarding, aftercare and stuff like that. But, just for the sake of the conversation today, I have a few minutes left over here, and I want to sort of like go through some rapid fire questions that are on par with what we've been talking about, but, maybe just sort of changing the tune a little bit over here. So you mentioned, having two kids, and I'm curious, if you had an opportunity to swap roles with one of your kids for a day, what do you think would surprise you most about being a kid in today's world?
My older daughter is a competitive gymnast, and so I think I would just be floored. Like when I look at the things she can do, I'm like, I wish it would just be fun. I think it would be really fun to be in her shoes for a day.
That's really cool.
But also I think it's way more challenging than it was for me. I mean, I ran around. I was a latchkey kid essentially, and so she has much more structure, and there's benefits, and also sometimes more stress, I think, in her life. I think I'd be surprised by that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you can travel back and give yourself, the younger, new mom version of yourself, a piece of parenting advice, what would that be?
Your intuition is almost never wrong, and to speak up about
Yeah.
it.
Love it. Okay. Well, if you were to write a children's book based on your own parenting experiences, what would the title be, and what would the book be about?
Everything's going to go wrong, but it's going to be okay.
Well said. Well said. And if you could have a superpower as a mom that's mundane, it has to do with parenting, what would that be and why?
I want to be able to read minds because my kids sometimes are very
Huh?
chatty, but they also like, what did you do today? I don't know. How was your day?
Nothing.
Good.
Right? Yeah. Love that. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know we touched on a lot of different subjects, on a lot of different things today. If it could be one, like, if you could sum up for what we talked about today for a one sentence or two sentence words of advice from your experience of what we talked about today to parents listening out there today, what would that be?
It's not you. It really is just this hard, and you can do it.
Awesome. Very, very well said. So before we finish today, can you, if people want to find more about you and about what you do and your course and stuff, where can people find you?
I am at shebirthsbravely.com and Instagram at shebirthsbravely. The course is right on the website. And I do offer like free consultations, so feel free to sign up for that. And if you come in through the course, we do a couple one-on-ones where you get to talk about your birth plan and what your goals are, and then we'll help you kind of create a plan to bring as much of that to life as possible.
Amazing. Susie, this was absolutely awesome. I learned so much today. Thank you so much for everything.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.